The Tower of London sat silent under a pale morning sky. Inside, 22-year-old guard Daniel Marsh stood at his post, shoulders back, rifle held firm. His boots were polished to a mirror shine. His uniform was perfect, but his hands were trembling. This was only his third week guarding the crown jewels. He had dreamed of this job since he was a boy. His grandfather had been a yeoman warder. His father had served in the Coldstream Guards. Daniel carried their legacy on his shoulders every single day. He memorized every rule. He followed every protocol. He never looked away from his duty. But today, something felt different. The air inside the jewel house was cool and heavy. The diamonds in the imperial state crown sparkled under soft lights. Tourists whispered as they passed, their voices echoing off stone walls. Daniel kept his eyes forward. He didn't blink. He didn't move. Then the radio crackled in his earpiece.
All units.
Be advised. Royal visit inbound. 8 to 5 minutes. Daniel's heart skipped. A royal visit here. Now he straightened even more, though he didn't think that was possible. His pulse quickened. This was it. This was the moment every guard hoped for and feared at the same time. A chance to prove himself. A chance to be seen, but also a chance to fail. The minutes crawled by. Daniel heard footsteps approaching, slow, confident. The kind of footsteps that belonged to someone important, and then she appeared. Camilla, the queen consort, stepped into the corridor. She wore a long cream coat and pearl earrings. Her expression was calm, regal. Behind her walked a private secretaries and a security officer. They moved like a well-rehearsed performance. Daniel's throat tightened. He had been briefed on royal protocol. He knew the rules. But knowing and doing were two very different things. Camilla walked toward the viewing platform where the crown jewels were displayed. She smiled politely at the tourists who stepped aside. She nodded to the staff. And then she looked directly at Daniel. "Good morning," she said softly. Daniel nodded once. "Your Majesty?" She moved closer to the glass case. Her eyes lingered on the St. Edward's crown, the coronation crown. The holiest object in the collection? Then she did something unexpected. She turned to one of her secretaries and said, "I'd like a closer look." The secretary hesitated. "Ma'am, the glass barriers are— I'm aware," Camilla said, her voice still polite but firm. "I'd like to see it up close." "Surely that can be arranged." Daniel felt his stomach drop. He knew the rules. No one, absolutely no one, was allowed past the security. Barriers without written authorization from the master of the jewel house. Not even royalty. Not even the queen consort herself. The secretary glanced at the security officer. The security officer glanced at Daniel. Everyone was waiting for someone else to make the decision. Camilla stepped forward. She moved toward the restricted area, her hand reaching for the velvet rope that marked the boundary. And Daniel did something he never thought he would do. He stepped in front of her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you pass." The room went silent. Camilla stopped. Her eyes met his. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed, and somewhere in the shadows, hidden from view, Prince William stood watching. If you want to see what happens next, make sure you're subscribed, because this story is about to get even more intense. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He had just refused the queen consort, and there was no going back. Camilla's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or disbelief, excuse me, she said quietly. Daniel swallowed hard. His mouth was dry. His hands were sweating inside his white gloves, but his voice stayed calm. "I apologize, Your Majesty," he said. "But no one is permitted beyond the barrier without written authorization. That includes all visitors." The secretary stepped forward quickly, her face flushed. "Guard, do you understand who you're speaking to?" "Yes, ma'am," Daniel said. "I do. Then surely you can make an exception." "I cannot," Daniel interrupted. His voice was respectful but firm. "The protocols exist for the safety and preservation of the crown jewels. They apply to everyone. The security officer looked uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Tourists nearby had stopped walking. They were watching now, phones half raised, unsure if they should record or look away. Camilla tilted her head slightly. She studied Daniel's face. His young face, his nervous eyes, his trembling jaw. "You're very young," she said softly. "How long have you been in this position?" 3 weeks, ma'am." A faint smile touched her lips. 3 weeks. And you're already willing to refuse a member of the royal family. Daniel didn't answer. He wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a condemnation. Camilla glanced at the crown jewels behind the glass. The St. Edward's crown glittered under the lights, ancient and untouchable. Then she looked back at Daniel. "Do you know what these represent?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "They represent the history and sovereignty of the United Kingdom." "They represent more than that," Camilla said. "They represent duty, sacrifice, the weight of responsibility." She paused. "You understand that, don't you?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I do, ma'am." Camilla held his gaze for a long moment. Then she stepped back. "Very well," she said. "You're doing your job, guard. I respect that." The secretary looked shocked. "Ma'am, surely it's fine," Camilla said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She turned and began walking back toward the corridor. Daniel felt his knees go weak. Relief flooded through him like cold water. He had done it. He had held his ground. And somehow, miraculously, it had worked. But as Camilla walked away, she paused. She looked over her shoulder, her eyes finding Daniel one last time. "Not everyone would have done what you just did," she said. "Remember that." Then she was gone. The tourists started moving again. The whispers began. The security officer gave Daniel a long, unreadable look before following Camilla out of the room. Daniel stood frozen at his post. His heart was still racing. His hands were still shaking. But he had done it. He had followed the rules. He had protected the jewels, and he had no idea that everything was about to change, because in the shadows, Prince William was still watching. William had arrived at the Tower of London that morning for a private tour of the archives. He had wanted to see some of the historical documents stored in the vaults. He hadn't planned to visit the jewel house at all. But when he heard the commotion over the radio, he had followed the sound. He had watched the entire encounter from a doorway across the hall. He had seen Daniel step in front of Camilla. He had seen the young guard's hands tremble. He had heard every word, and he had been impressed. William knew how hard it was to say no to royalty. He had seen people bend over backward to please his family, even when it meant breaking rules or ignoring safety protocols. He had seen guards look the other way. He had seen staff members cave under pressure. But this young man hadn't. William pulled out his phone. He typed a quick message to his private secretary. "Find out the name of the guard at the Crown Jewels post. I want to speak with him." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and walked quietly toward the exit. Daniel had no idea his life was about to change forever. The rest of Daniel's shift passed in a blur. He stood at his post, rigid and silent, but his mind was spinning. He replayed the encounter over and over. Every word, every look, every moment had he made a terrible mistake. Would he lose his job? Would his family be ashamed? When his shift finally ended, Daniel walked to the changing room with heavy steps. His legs felt like stone. Other guards glanced at him but said nothing. Word had already spread. Everyone knew what had happened. Daniel changed out of his uniform in silence. He folded it carefully, his hands still shaking. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to go home and never come back, but as he reached for his bag, the door opened. His commanding officer stepped inside. Captain Morris was a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes. He had served in the British Army for 30 years before taking this position. He didn't smile often, and he wasn't smiling now, Marshy said. "My office. Now." Daniel's heart sank. This was it. This was the moment he'd been dreading. He followed Captain Morris down the narrow stone corridor. His boots echoed on the ancient floors. The Tower of London felt colder than usual. "Darker, Captain." Morris opened the door to his small office and gestured for Daniel to sit. Daniel sat. His hands gripped his knees. Maurice closed the door. He walked to his desk and leaned against it, arms crossed. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he spoke. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Daniel's throat tightened. "Sir, I followed protocol." "I know it might have seemed you refused the Queen Consort," Morris interrupted. His voice was flat, impossible to read. "Yes, sir. Because the rules, I know the rules, Marsh." Morris stared at him. "The question is, do you understand the consequences?" Daniel looked down. "I think so, sir." Morris was quiet again. Then, to Daniel's shock, he smiled. It was a small smile, but it was there asterisk. "You did the right thing," Morris said quietly. Daniel looked up, confused. "Sir, you followed protocol," Maurice continued. "You didn't cave under pressure. You treated the Queen Consort with respect, but you held your ground. That takes courage, Marsh. Real courage." Daniel blinked. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I'm not in trouble?" Morris shook his head. "No, you're not in trouble. In fact, you've just proven something very important. You've proven that you understand what this job really means." Relief washed over Daniel like a wave. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. But Maurice wasn't finished. "However," he said, his tone shifting, "there's something else you need to know." Daniel tensed again. Sir Morris walked around his desk and picked up a piece of paper. He handed it to Daniel. It was a formal letter. The royal crest was printed at the top. Daniel scanned the words, his eyes widening with every line. It was a request. A personal request. Prince William wanted to meet him. Daniel looked up at Morris, his mouth open. "Is this real?" Morris nodded. "It's real. The Prince of Wales was at the Tower this morning. He saw what happened, and he wants to speak with you personally." Daniel felt like the room was spinning. "Why, I don't know," Morris said. "But when royalty asks to meet you, you don't ask questions. You show up." Daniel stared at the letter. His name was written in elegant script. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning. 9 o'clock. Kensington Palace. "What do I do?" Daniel whispered. "You be yourself," Morris said. "You speak honestly, and you remember that you didn't do anything wrong. You did your job? That's all." Daniel nodded slowly, but inside his mind was racing. What did Prince William want? Was this a test? A warning? A reward? He had no idea. But one thing was certain. Tomorrow his life would change forever. That night, Daniel barely slept. He lay in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling. The letter sat on his bedside table, glowing faintly in the moonlight. He thought about his grandfather, the stories he used to tell, the pride in his voice when he spoke about duty and honor. Daniel had always wanted to make him proud. And now, somehow, he had caught the attention of the future king. He closed his eyes and tried to calm his racing heart. Tomorrow, he would meet Prince William, and he had no idea what would happen next. Kensington Palace looked even more intimidating in person than Daniel had imagined. The iron gates, the manicured gardens, the guards standing like statues at every entrance. Daniel arrived 20 minutes early. He wore his dress uniform, freshly pressed. His shoes were polished until they gleamed. His hair was combed back neatly. He looked every bit the professional guard. But inside, he felt like a child. A private secretary met him at the entrance. She was polite but formal, leading him through long hallways lined with portraits of royals long dead. Their painted eyes seemed to follow him as he walked. "Prince William will see you in the drawing room," she said. "Please wait here." She opened a heavy wooden door and gestured inside. Daniel stepped into the room and froze. It was smaller than he expected. Elegant, but not overwhelming. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner. Bookshelves lined the walls. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting golden squares on the polished floor, and standing by the window, looking out at the gardens, was Prince William. He was dressed casually. A blue sweater, dark trousers, no tie, no formality. He looked like a regular man, except for the weight of history that hung around him like an invisible cloak. William turned when he heard the door close. "Daniel Marsh," he said, his voice warm. Daniel snapped to attention. "Your Royal Highness." William smiled. "Please, sit." "You don't need to stand on ceremony here." Daniel hesitated, then sat stiffly on the edge of a chair. His back was straight. His hands rested on his knees. William sat across from him, relaxed and easy. He leaned back, studying Daniel with calm, intelligent eyes. "I wanted to meet you," William said, "because what you did yesterday was remarkable." Daniel swallowed. "I was only doing my job, sir." "Exactly," William said. "You were doing your job, and that's rarer than you think." Daniel didn't know how to respond. He stayed silent. William leaned forward slightly. "Do you know how many people would have let Camilla through?" "I don't, sir." "Most of them," William said quietly. "Most people would have bent the rules. They would have told themselves it was fine because she's royalty, because she's important, because it would be easier." He paused, "But you didn't." Daniel looked down. "I didn't want to disrespect her, sir." You respected the crown," William interrupted gently. "You respected what those jewels represent. And you respected the duty you swore to uphold. That's not disrespect, Daniel. That's integrity." The word hung in the air between them, integrity. Daniel had never thought of it that way. He had just been following the rules. He had just been doing what he was trained to do. But William saw something more. "Let me tell you something," William said, his voice softer now. "When I was younger, I watched people bend over backward for my family. I watched them ignore safety protocols. I watched them break rules because they were afraid of saying no to us." He looked out the window, his expression distant. "I hated it," he continued, "because those rules exist for a reason. They protect us. They protect the things that matter. And when people ignore them, even for good intentions, they weaken everything." He looked back at Daniel. "You didn't weaken anything yesterday. You strengthened it." Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. He didn't trust himself to speak. William smiled. "Camilla called me last night. Do you know what she said?" Daniel shook his head. "She said you reminded her of my grandfather, Prince Philip. She said he would have done exactly the same thing." Daniel's eyes widened. Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, a man known for his discipline, his duty, his unwavering commitment to service. "She wasn't upset?" Daniel asked quietly. "Not at all," William said. "She was impressed. She told me you were respectful, calm, and clear. You didn't falter. You didn't apologize for doing your job." He paused. "She said you were exactly the kind of person who should be guarding the crown jewels." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had been so sure he'd made a terrible mistake. So sure he'd ruined everything. But instead, he had earned the respect of the queen consort and the admiration of the future king. William stood, and Daniel quickly rose to his feet. "I wanted to thank you personally," William said, extending his hand. "What you did matters. It might not seem like much, but it does. People are watching, and they need to see that duty still means something." Daniel shook his hand, his grip firm despite the trembling in his chest. "Thank you, sir," he said. "I won't forget this." William smiled. "I don't think either of us will." As Daniel left Kensington Palace, walking back through those long hallways, he felt different, lighter, stronger. He had done the right thing. And now he knew it. The story didn't end there. Within days, word of Daniel's encounter spread through the Tower of London. Guards whispered about it in the changing rooms. Staff members talked about it over lunch. Tourists asked questions. Some people called him brave. Others called him foolish. But everyone knew his name. Daniel returned to his post at the crown jewels, and at first, everything seemed normal. He stood at attention. He followed protocol. He did his job, but something had changed. People looked at him differently now. There was respect in their eyes. Even the older guards, the ones who had served for decades, nodded at him in the halls. Captain Morris called him into his office again a week later, Marshy said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit." Daniel sat. He was less nervous this time, but still cautious. Morris slid a folder across the desk. "This came from Kensington Palace this morning." Daniel opened it. Inside was another letter, and a photograph. The photograph showed him standing at his post, uniform crisp, posture perfect. It had been taken the day of the incident. Someone had captured the exact moment he stepped in front of Camilla. The letter was from the royal household. It was a commendation. Daniel stared at the words, his heart pounding, mended for exceptional dedication to duty and adherence to protocol and the protection of the crown jewels. His name was printed at the bottom, and above it, a signature, Prince William's signature. Daniel looked up at Morris, speechless. "You're being recognized officially," Morris said. "This will go in your service record." "It's rare, Marsh. Very rare." Daniel swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say." Asterisk. "You don't need to say anything," Morris replied. "You've already said it all through your actions." He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "But I'll tell you this. You've set a new standard here. The other guards are watching you. They see what happens when someone does the right thing, even when it's hard. Don't let them down." Daniel nodded. "I won't, sir." But the weight of those words settled on his shoulders. He wasn't just a guard anymore. He was an example, and that was both an honor and a burden. Over the following weeks, Lemuel noticed something else. The tourists who visited the jewel house started asking for him by name. They wanted to take pictures with him. They wanted to hear the story. Some even brought their children, pointing at Daniel and saying, "That's the young man who stood up for what was right." It was overwhelming. Asterisk. Daniel had never wanted attention. He had only wanted to serve. But now, he was becoming a symbol of something bigger than himself. One afternoon, a little boy approached him. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old. His eyes were wide with admiration. "Are you the guard who stopped the Queen?" the boy asked. Daniel looked down at him and smiled gently. "I didn't stop her. I just followed the rules." "That's what my dad said," the boy replied. "He said you were brave." Daniel's throat tightened. "Your dad is very kind." The boy's father stepped forward, his hand on his son's shoulder. "We came specifically to see you," he said. "I wanted my son to meet someone who understands what duty means." He extended his hand, and Daniel shook it. "Thank you," the father said quietly. "You've taught him something important today." As they walked away, Daniel felt something shift inside him. He had thought this job was about protecting jewels, about standing guard, about following orders. But now he understood it was about something more. It was about showing people that principles still mattered, that rules existed for a reason, that doing the right thing, even when it was hard, was always worth it. And that was a responsibility he was willing to carry. One evening, as Daniel walked home from his shift, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "This is William. I wanted you to know something. The story of what you did has reached my children. George asked me about it. He wanted to know if being a prince meant people would always say yes to him. I told him no. I told him about you. Thank you for that lesson." Daniel stared at the message, tears stinging his eyes. He had changed something. Maybe not the world, but something. He typed back a simple reply. "It was an honor, sir. Thank you." And as he walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, Daniel thought about his grandfather. He thought about the stories, the legacy, the weight of duty passed down through generations. And he knew without a doubt that his grandfather would have been proud. 6 months later, Daniel stood in the same spot where it all began. The Tower of London. The crown jewels. The weight of history. All around him. But everything was different now. He was no longer the nervous young guard who questioned every decision. He was confident, steady. Respected other guards came to him for advice. Tourists smiled when they saw him. Even the senior officers treated him as an equal. But the most important change was the one inside. Daniel had learned that doing the right thing wasn't always easy. It wasn't always popular. And it didn't always feel good in the moment. But it was always worth it. One cold morning in December, Daniel received a call from Captain Morris. "Marsh, I need you to come to my office before your shift." Daniel's heart skipped. He'd heard that tone before. Something was happening. When he arrived, Morris was standing by the window, looking out at the Thames. "Sit," Morris said without turning around. Daniel sat. Morris finally turned to face him. In his hands was a small velvet box. "You're being promoted," Maurice said simply. Daniel's eyes widened. "Sir, you're being moved to a new position? One with more responsibility. The royal household has specifically requested you for a special assignment." He opened the box. Inside was a new badge, a new rank. "You'll be part of the personal security detail for royal events," Maurice explained. "You'll work directly with the family during public appearances, ceremonies, and state functions." Daniel couldn't breathe. "I don't understand." "Why me?" Morris smiled. "Because they trust you. Because you've proven you can't be influenced. Because when the world is watching and the pressure is on, you do what's right." He handed Daniel the box. "This isn't just about what happened that day with the Queen Consort. It's about everything you've done since. The way you've carried yourself. The example you've set. You've earned this." Daniel took the box with trembling hands. He stared at the badge, the weight of it sinking in.
"I'm honored, sir."
"Don't be honored yet," Morris said with a slight smile. "The real work is just beginning." That night, Daniel called his father. His father had been a quiet man his whole life. He rarely showed emotion. But when Daniel told him about the promotion, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then his father spoke, his voice thick with pride. "Your grandfather would have been so proud of you, Daniel." Daniel closed his eyes. "I hope so." "He is," his father said firmly. "I know he is." And for the first time in months, Daniel allowed himself to feel it. The pride, the accomplishment, the knowledge that he had honored his family's legacy. The following week, Daniel attended his first royal event in his new role. It was a ceremony at Westminster Abbey. The entire royal family was present. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. Daniel stood at his post near the entrance, scanning the crowd, alert and focused. And then he saw her Camilla. She walked past him, elegant and composed. For a moment, their eyes met. She paused. Then she smiled. It was a small smile. A knowing smile. A smile that said, "I remember." And Daniel smiled back. No words were needed. She continued on. Daniel returned his focus to the crowd. But something settled inside him in that moment. A sense of completion. Of understanding. He had stood his ground. He had followed his principles. And in doing so, he had earned something more valuable than any promotion or recognition. He had earned respect, not just from the royal family, not just from his fellow guards, but from himself. As the ceremony concluded and the guests began to leave, Daniel stood tall at his post. The cameras moved on. The crowds dispersed. The moment passed, but the lesson remained. Duty wasn't about blind obedience. It wasn't about never questioning. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about knowing what mattered. About standing firm when the world tried to push you aside. About being willing to do the hard thing because it was the right thing. And as Daniel walked out of Westminster Abbey that evening, the winter air cold against his face, he thought about all the young guards who would come after him. He hoped they would remember his story. He hoped they would understand that their choices mattered, that their integrity mattered, that they mattered. Because in a world that often felt chaotic and uncertain, where rules were bent and principles were compromised, there was still power in standing firm. There was still honor in doing what was right, and there was still hope in the young man who refused to let anyone, not even royalty, compromise what he believed. In Daniel Marsh had started as a nervous 22-year-old guard, terrified of making a mistake, but he had become something more. He had become a reminder. A reminder that courage comes in many forms, that integrity isn't about grand gestures, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand your ground and say, No, not today. As he walked home through the streets of London, the lights of the city glowing around him, Daniel smiled. He had done something that mattered, and that was enough.